I think we'll make a start. We haven't yet got the vice chairman, but everybody else is here. So welcome to this afternoon, the 27th of March 2025, meeting of the Audit and Accounts Committee. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. Please ensure, though, that your phone is set to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. This meeting is being live streamed and a recording will be available to view later on the County Council's website. There's no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave by the side doors to my left and use the external staircase to assemble in the car park. Item 1 is apologies for absence and declarations of interest. Racinda, would you care to report any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Ambrose Smith.
Thank you. And does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? No, thank you. Item 2 is the minutes of the meetings on the 30th of January 2025 and the 26th of February 2025. And the minutes and action log. The committee is being asked to approve the minutes of both of those meetings as an accurate record. Are there any objections to the accuracy of the minutes? No. Okay, so we approve those minutes. Are there any questions on the action log, please? Can I just ask, it's not included on the action log and I don't think we cover it later, but the BDO fees, have we got any progress or news from PSAA, Michael?
We have had correspondence with PSAA over the last 2 weeks, which has concluded in us arranging, having to arrange a meeting with them. I'm not sure if that's yet been scheduled. Tom is picking that one up, but I can confirm maybe by writing afterwards.
It would be helpful if you could let us know what the situation is. Either we can add something to the minutes or write to separately. Nothing else from anybody? No, thank you very much. Item 4 then, Stephen, is the financial reporting and accounting policies. Stephen Howarth, the head of finance, will introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. So this report begins and ends with a bit of an update on the status of the 2023-24 audit completion following the final accounts being taken to the last meeting of this committee, and also on preparatory work that is underway for the production of 2024-25's draft accounts, as we are heading very rapidly towards the end of the year and preparatory work is well underway. But turning to the main part of the report, one key aspect of that prep work is the accounting policies for the year, and that's what we brought to you today for review. Deciding on the appropriate accounting policies is a matter for the Section 151 officer. They're broadly consistent year to year for comparability, changing mainly when the code of practice changes, and they're included in their totality in the statement of accounts document each year as well. So we flag here in this report and in Appendix 1 the changes that are proposed to the policies, and you get the full suite of policies in Appendix 2. Many of the changes are more administrative in nature and changes that reflect changes in the underlying code of practice, with changes to accounting for leases being the most material change that we bring to your attention. So just to delve into that a little bit, so local authorities are required to account for leases in accordance with the International Financial Reporting Standard 16 from 2024-25, with last year, 23-24, having been a bit of a transitional year. So you might have seen some of the information on that in the draft accounts last year, as we were required to disclose effectively what the impact would have been. As the report sets out in a bit of detail, this change effectively brings assets onto the balance sheet that the council has a right to use through leases or other similar contractual arrangements, and they're accounted for in a similar way to other capital items, just with an offsetting lease liability. Having had the transitional year, we think the council's processes are reasonably well established to capture and account for the necessary information. This just now needs to formally form part of our statement of accounts and the accounting policies going forward. But other than that, the report and the appendices set out the changes we've made, so I'll happily try to answer any questions.
Okay, the one thing you didn't mention is whether it affects the amount of money that the county council has to spend. And if the answer is no, we can quickly move on, I hope.
The report might set this out, but obviously the underlying contractual arrangement might have a cash outflow, but the change in the accounting policy does not have an impact on the resources available to the council necessarily.
Okay, that wasn't quite as succinct as I was hoping. Chris.
Thank you very much indeed. And I thought it was only politicians who answered a different question from the one which was asked. But congratulations on the way that was done, Stephen. It was quite adroit. I read through this paper with a great deal of interest, and I fully accept that this has been written and it's the way in which we're going to move forwards. But I'd like to just challenge a couple of things, if only to think about it for the future. First of all, the de minimis figures which are within this, that is the £4,000 accrual de minimis threshold, and particularly the IFRS £10,000 de minimis threshold that is utilised for capital assets and right of use assets. And I just wonder the extent to which those figures are appropriate. Now, I'm not trying to change it for the audit which is underway now for 24/5, far from it. But I think that it's quite correct for us to challenge these numbers. And I just wonder what the justification is for the accruals figure, for example, to be £4,000 rather than 14 or 24 or 34,000 pounds, especially given the de minimis, the figure that is utilised for the figures which are deemed to be not relevant for accounts purposes in terms of adjustments. And on the £10,000 figure for capital on IFRS 16, IFRS 16 doesn't help us at all. It doesn't help the users of our accounts at all. As far as I can tell, it's merely there in order to comply with the requirements of government whole of government accounts, and just as yet another added complication to our accounts, making them even less intelligible to any local people, or even for that matter councillors, who wish to use the accounts. So why have we set £10,000 as the figure? Because, and I'm saying this based on no knowledge whatsoever, I'm merely guessing, but guessing particularly when thinking about schools and school property, my guess is that more than 90% of the value involved in this will be accounted for by a lot less than 10% of the number of items which are involved. So is £10,000 a sensible figure for us to have? Has it been plucked out of the air? Is it recommended? Or would it be more sensible for us to achieve virtually the same result by having a figure, for example, of £100,000? So that's the challenge I've got as far as those are concerned. My second point is to do with the revaluation date for non-operational assets. It makes abundant sense for that to be the 31st of March, coinciding with the date of our accounts. My only concern is to ensure that the additional work that is needed will not threaten the date when accounts need to be produced, at least in draft form. So I do have a slight concern about that, but I'm sure that that's already been taken into account. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Just before you answer that, Jeff, is there a similar related? Well, raise it as well, and then we'll just cover all the points together, if that's all right with you, Stephen.
Thank you. I just wonder if you can direct me to the policy that deals with the valuation of PFI assets. And I don't know how many PFI assets, PFI leases we have in the council, but on the handover of a PFI asset, they must be coming, some of them must be coming to a conclusion because they're only 25 years, normally 20, 25 years. And whilst money will be going into a life cycle cost fund and being used, it tends to be on an equal percentage basis year by year. So when you come to the handover, although the contract, the SPV has to hand it over in good condition, and again, I don't know what's in the contracts concerning the PFIs that we do have, there may well be quite a substantial amounts that need to be replaced, which may not necessarily be covered by the life cycle fund at that particular point. So I just wondered, is there a policy that deals with this, and where is it stated? And it may well be covered, but I couldn't find it.
Stephen, are you able to answer those various questions?
Yep, and if I do forget and miss anything, please let me know. So on Councillor Bowden's first question about the de minimis, the accrual de minimis of 4,000, this is an item that is discussed every year within the finance team and proposals made to Michael around, and we have discussed in the past increasing it. It's quite a long-standing value or thereabouts. Might have been increased sort of on an inflationary basis occasionally, and we have discussed increasing it. Really, the benefit from a amount of work perspective to increasing it isn't particularly great. Processing an accrual of that level versus sort of a 10,000 one doesn't bring much marginal additional time. And for some of the council services dealing with sort of revenue budgets year to year, a 4,000 accrual in hitting, with actuals hitting 1 year versus the next can make a fair bit of difference. So on balance, we do think that an accrual of that level, an accrual limit of that level is still appropriate, but we do discuss it and will continue to discuss it every year. The IFRS 16, or the right of use asset limit de minimis being set at 10,000, is distinct from that. We've obviously had to invent this limit or produce a proposal for this limit from scratch because of IFRS 16 coming in. And as part of doing that, we did a bit of benchmarking with other local authorities that have sort of gone ahead with implementing IFRS 16 before us, and 10,000 seems to be a pretty common value used. Broadly speaking, it's intended to sort of be more expensive than a computer and less expensive than a vehicle in terms of trying to pitch where the de minimis would sit. But again, so we've done some benchmarking with other councils on that, and councils in the region as well who are implementing IFRS 16 at the same timescale as we are. The valuation date change on some of the assets being to the 31st of March. We've discussed this with the council's current values, and we do expect it to be deliverable within the timescales needed for the draft accounts. We're pretty confident about that. And turning to Councillor Seif's question around the PFI, so the accounts and the accounting policies are obviously concerned with the year in question. So the valuation of the PFI asset, I think, is done. The policy that covers that is the normal capital valuations policy, and to an extent the IFRS 16 aspect of it now as well. In terms of what the value of that will be when the PFI comes to an end, I think that's more of a matter for sort of the council's capital programming and projections around that rather than the year's accounts.
You do need a valuation policy at some point. So you could say, well, it's replacement costs less a projection about what our future expend or immediate expend that's not covered. For example, you could say that. That would be a policy, but it's different from your normal, regular policy whilst those contracts continue and they're live. And we must, I don't know, are we coming to the end of any of our PFIs?
So we aren't coming to an end of the PFIs for a while. So it's into the 2030s. So if it's needed to update the accounting policies when we get close to that point, we obviously will do so. But the accounting policies around asset valuations should cover, covers all of the council's assets in one form or another. So it'll be in one of those approaches if we don't decide on a bespoke approach.
Okay, Chris.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Stephen, for the explanations given. I'm always a little bit concerned when we say we've listened to what other councils are doing and we've followed that, because there's always a danger in following the herd that you end up falling off the edge of the cliff with the rest of the herd. But I accept what you're saying, and also understand the concept that it should be more expensive than a computer and cheaper than a vehicle. That makes sense, but I do still feel that the overwhelming majority of value probably is in a very small number of individual items. And I just wondered whether any thought had been given as to the percentage compliance we're achieving at maybe a lot more trouble by having a £10,000 figure rather than 100,000. But I wasn't saying all of this for any decision to be changed today, merely to provoke some thought maybe for the future. take the point you made about £10,000 and listening to Councillor Seif's, the answer to Councillor Seif's question about 2030 and the PFI, the likelihood is, of course, that this council won't exist in 2030. So it's an issue which will be inherited by others. But that set me thinking on the £10,000 figure. Did we check with Peterborough City Council as to what their policy is? Since the likelihood is that some parts of this council's area, upper tier responsibilities, will be in the same unitary authority as Peterborough City Council area currently. And it would be interesting to know if we are converging with them or diverging from them.
So I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. We have definitely discussed IFRS 16 recently with the the councils in the region. So I can, if I can't find out, I'll get back to you on that.
I'm grateful for that, Chair, and I would just like to make the general point, to the extent that it's possible to have some convergence with what Peterborough City Council does, it will help tremendously when we have both the disaggregation and the reaggregation of all sorts of things which are going to happen. So where we can have policies which are discretionary and we can use that discretion to have some degree of convergence, that may be helpful.
Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. I suspect Michael may want to come in on this as well. Well, first of all, just to clarify, it's somewhat speculative at this stage about what form local government will take in Cambridgeshire. So I respect Councillor Bowden's comments, but this county council, as do all the other councils in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, remain entirely sovereign until such time as statutory orders are laid. As such, it's for this council to determine its policies. Yes, we do share good practice with the other authorities. Michael meets with the other Section 151 officers from the districts and city councils on an ongoing basis, but converging our policies would only happen where it was appropriate for this council to choose to do so. So I just need to be clear that this council remains sovereign in its decision making until such time as either statutory orders are laid by government or indeed a new council replaces it. I trust that's helpful. Thank you.
I was going to say pretty much the same thing, so I echo all of that. That will be a matter as we move into shadow authority for that point to then start considering that, and the vesting or the vested authority or authorities would then consider that as part of the policies. Coming back to the point that Stephen made, Howarth, in terms of the de minimis level, it is something that's discussed. It's something that I came in a number of years ago, and one of my first questions related to that started mid-March because I've had different levels. But again, it comes back to capacity, its accuracy, its impact, and we'll continue to review that. I actually think that the shadow authority and the vested authorities will be the point at which to look at this again. So I think it's a much bigger debate as that progresses.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen. If you are happy to provide a bit of information, just bearing in mind what Stephen and Michael have said, that will be helpful. We move to the report recommendations. The committee is being asked to note and comment on the accounting policies for 2024-25 statement of accounts, which we've done, and no vote is required. Thanks, Stephen. Next item is an insurance report for the Place and Sustainability Directorate, which will be introduced by its Executive Director, Frank Jordan. Welcome, Frank. Do you want to introduce your report briefly, highlighting the key things, and then we'll no doubt have a number of questions for you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So as outlined, this is a report providing assurance around effectively the governance and the control environment for the Place and Sustainability Directorate. So at section 2, first of all, I'll just outline the functions and the key responsibilities for the directorate, so the committee are aware of the range of functions that we provide. And in section 3, particularly just highlight areas that I highlighted in my assurance statement for 24-25, which I think are picked up through what we've managed to deliver during the year. So I particularly highlighted areas of key risks for the authority that the directorate was responsible for in 24-25, such as the review of the waste PFI contract, delivery of energy projects, continual change around the delivery of highways, And I just highlighted the general need to just make sure that we delivered the business plan as produced. So that was something that was highlighted in the assurer statement. And in the council's annual governance statement, there was one particular reference to a particular issue, which is picked up later in relation to audit actions, but it was a particular reference around historic concerns around procurement, around the procurement of advisors in relation to litigation in relation to the busway. So I can give assurance that procurement arrangements for those types of matters are in compliance with our procurement regime within the council. We do need to nonetheless formally report those historic breaches, which we will be doing to the Assets and Procurement Committee in June. What then just go into the report is the existing control environment. So I've just described that in the report, but in terms of Appendix B, provide more of a framework which outlines the areas where we feel that there is good assurance in some areas, but it does also highlight there's some further work that we'd want to do in 25-26 to improve our assurance environment further as a directorate. But what I would outline is that the overall control environment I would describe as being good and effective, particularly in relation to the fact that we've got a performance management regime, a clear risk management regime. We manage finance both from a revenue and a capital basis effectively, and we review that on a monthly basis. And we manage significant change that the directorate's responsible for appropriately with appropriate governance in place. And with all of those arrangements being reported to the relevant policy and service committees. So we also provide that assurance both at an officer level and a member level. Having said that, you'll see that in the assurance framework, which I outline in Appendix B, there are some areas that are of particular focus where I think assurance isn't as good as it should be. And therefore, we're undertaking some further work to make sure we can provide that assurance. That doesn't necessarily mean on the first one, which is about health and safety assurance, that we've got a high level of health and safety risk. But what I want to make sure is that we're able to provide members of the council the assurance that we've got appropriate policies in place, procedures, risk assessments, and we test that on those key areas that we're responsible for, where there's inherently higher risk in terms of health and safety. So areas such as where we've got operations, such as waste or highways, or we've got particular issues where we're providing infrastructure or services that could have an impact. So we just want to provide that additional assurance. So we're doing that testing during, we started that testing and continue to that in 25-26. I think another area of particular improvement that's needed for the directorate, we need to improve the way that we manage complaints. So there are high numbers of complaints, particularly for the directorate. Probably not surprising to members, we get a high number of complaints in relation to highways. We get also complaints, though, in relation to parking and waste. Not actually unfamiliar issues to place directors across the country, but nonetheless, we need to look at it from a Cambridgeshire point of view. Notwithstanding that, I think the way that we actually manage complaints needs to be significantly improved in terms of responding in a timely manner. And then finally, actually learning from complaints so that we can make improvements. In terms of providing that assurance, we put in additional resources and changing the way that we manage some of the business support functions to be able to provide that extra capacity around those particular areas. The report also specifically highlights the current actions that arise from previous audit activity. And as of the time of writing, there were 22 actions that were overdue and open. The appendix that has been provided provides an update on where we're actually making progress on each of those. But I also did want to highlight in the report that as a result of audit activity, a number of improvements have been made. So to particularly highlight, for example, the improved governance and arrangements we've got in place around Section 106 and community infrastructure levy management, with a clear governance in place, which is a council-wide board, and I can give assurance that there are no Section 106 agreements that have lapsed in terms of collection, and there is no Section 106 agreements currently where we're at risk of losing the money because we've not spent it within the required timeframes. I think more importantly as well, that we're now getting oversight of Section 106 agreements before we enter into them, particularly the significant ones, to make sure that we're not entering into unknown liabilities or responsibilities as a council. A second area where we've improved the governance is the capital programme management. So we've got better governance in place, clarification that we do manage the capital programme in line with the council's project framework. There were some further improvements we needed to make around making sure we can time record appropriately. That's particularly important to be able to charge time of officers to capital funding, as well as making it clear to grant funders that we're charging appropriately. That's now been resolved. And the key thing in terms of improvements, we're going to provide increased level of information to our policy and service committees in 25-26 in relation to capital programming. But as an example of that improved governance, the capital programme delivery for 24-25 has significantly improved compared to previous years. And then there's some clear lessons that have been learned in relation to the energy projects, and we've changed both the structure and the way that we would manage such projects in the future. But I think it's helpful to understand that the lessons that have been learned that have been applied for the future. So just to summarise, I think that we can give assurance around an effective control environment. We do have effective governance arrangements, both within the directorate and how we support governance at an officer level and then at committee level. There are some improvements that we have made, but clearly this focus as outlined in Appendix B for some further improvements for the areas that I've highlighted. But I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, in terms of what's in the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. So let me open it up to questions, comments. Chris?
May I have a couple of goes at this, please? Because may I just ask on one particular area first, because it does concern me particularly, and that was when I looked at the balanced scorecard. Now, these balanced scorecards are both dangerous and really helpful. They're dangerous because they're very simplistic, and they're very helpful because the RAG rating gives you a very, very clear alert as to some things which may be wrong. And one thing which, of course, always has to be said is we tend to ignore everything which is in green. So anything which looks as though it's okay almost drops off our radar, and all we see are red or amber. And that's always a rather unfair way to start looking at anything. But nevertheless, it comes with the territory of RAG rating. What really concerned me was something which didn't have a RAG rating, and that was to do with RIDDORs. And I was really surprised to see that we were awaiting data. Now, it looks as though we were awaiting data on a previous period rather than on a current period. And I'd have thought that RIDDORs were such important matters that we would be right on top of those. I'm amazed that we don't know what the number of RIDDORs were in the previous 12-month period. It just seems almost unbelievable to me. I'm quite confident it won't be a large number, but they are so fundamental. And then when I looked at the next item down, I was even more concerned, which are the number of near misses. And we don't have any information for that for the current period, nor for the previous period. And in fact, we're told it was last updated in April 2023. And we're told, when looking at the balanced scorecard, the direction for improvement, lower is better. Well, I might disagree with that, because sometimes higher is better because it shows that people are reporting near misses. And with this complete lack of data, and apparently no updating since April 23, has our near miss policy actually stopped? Are we not doing the near miss process? And it's so important because whilst a near miss isn't an incident as such, it helps stop future incidents. If you trip over in the car park over a raised stone, a raised paving stone, for example, if you trip over and you don't injure yourself, but you do trip over, by reporting it and by being encouraged to report it, it makes it less likely that a serious accident won't occur in the that a serious accident will occur in the future. So the reporting of near misses is so very important, and I just get the feeling from reading what we have in front of us here, that we've either stopped doing it, or we've stopped recording them, or stopped paying a great deal of attention to them. And I really would like some assurance that that isn't the case.
And when you answered, Frank, just remind everyone what a RIDDOR is.
So thank you, Councillor Bowden. So the first thing is this scorecard has been something that's been introduced in the directorate. So when I first came as executive director, there wasn't such a scorecard in place. So that's a new feature in terms of the governance arrangements. And what we're trying to do is just build in, from a directorate point of view, the areas that we need to focus on. So we've included in here that we felt that we should include the health and safety measures as a directorate. What I would do, though, is just to give assurance that in addition to this scorecard, there is entirely separate reporting on health and safety management at a council-wide level. That feeds into a board that actually Stephen chairs from an officer point of view. And as corporate leadership team, we review health and safety on a weekly basis. We do have a handle on the number of formal RIDDORs. So RIDORS is a formal report we have to report to the Health and Safety Executive. So it's report of infectious disease. I can't remember exactly what it's or injuries, I think.
Accident with a broken bone or death.
So that's the formal reporting arrangements we have in place. So I think really what I want to give assurance to the committee around is that this scorecard isn't the way that we manage health and safety at a council-wide level. And we do have that information, and that is reported separately through appropriate arrangements at the council-wide level. But having just created this at a directorate level, we wanted to make sure that it was included in our directorate scorecard as well, because health and safety is an important matter. And it's one of those areas that I outlined in my introduction that we particularly want to make sure we provide further assurance around health and safety management in the directorate, because I'm not able to see that the high level of assurance that we should be able to provide on that in that area. The second point you raised about near misses, I agree. What we want is a culture where near misses are reported openly, and we want to have more near misses, ideally, because that's a demonstration of the appropriate culture we've got around health and safety management. So I think the key thing I just wanted to make sure members are assured of is that this isn't the way that we manage and report formally health and safety management as a council. It's just demonstrate that we're wanting to build that into our scorecard as a directorate. So I think that's the way I would just summarise that. Does that answer the question, Councillor Bonham? And
yes, I'm very happy with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Sorry.
Apologies to Councillor Seif, just to supplement the answer that's been provided by Frank to members, just for the benefit of members. Our corporate health and safety team has records of all RIDDOR reported incidents and will be able to provide that data, so we can do that separately as a note outside. Those incidents are fully recorded and reported in line with health and safety requirements in relation to reporting of injuries, diseases and dangerous occurrences. That's what RIDDOR stands for. Health and safety is a standing item on the corporate leadership team every single week. We receive reports on any incidents to the corporate leadership team on a weekly basis, and that includes any RIDDOR incidents across the entirety of the council's operations. So what we actually have is whole council data. The disaggregation of the data to be included in that the balanced scorecard within Frank's directorate is why we currently haven't got the data formatted in that way. So it's not a matter of not having the data, it's just data disaggregation to support the dashboard that he's put in place, which I have to say I commend, considering that we should all be ensuring all of the directorates are owning health and safety to the extent necessary. And on reporting of near misses, no, near miss reporting is absolutely part of the council's core health and safety policy requirements for all staff, people who are visiting our premises, or indeed service users. Again, we should have data on near misses held by the corporate health and safety team. And in fact, I can recall having encouraged people previously through one of our all staff conversations to report near miss incidents, because the reporting of near misses can actually help prevent possible issues in future. Near misses can lead to remediation or some form of training that prevents incidents actually occurring. So it's a really important measure. I have to say, however, from experience, not just in Cambridgeshire but elsewhere, including emergency services, reporting of near misses are always considerably lower than you would ever want them to be. Thank you.
Indeed. Okay, Jeff.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'm delighted to hear your assurances on Section 106 and the collections, and everything is now collectible and will be put to the uses which they are intended. That's excellent news. But arising out of that, and indeed something that occurred at the discussion we had at the full council a couple of weeks ago, I wanted to ask you something that was actually going to raise originally under corporate risks, but I think it's got a place here as well, because financial security would also come into the remit in procurement generally, and our relations with any external provider of services, including developers on one hand and care providers, as was discussed at the council meeting, because we were talking about a care provider that had collapsed financially and that we then took over the responsibility. We won't go into what the outcome of that particular debate was, but it did bring to mind that and I say, I'm going back to the Section 106 case as well, that we should be bonding or getting financial security from our providers. So I wanted to ask whether that is part of the overall assurances that you are looking at and can give, particularly in things like highway maintenance and well, really any other third contract that's provided by a third party.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So in relation to 106 agreements, so as part of the assurance of any new Section 106 agreement, we're wanting to make sure that there is appropriate security provided against the 106 agreement. So a bond is usually a typical way of dealing with that. So that's something that we are able to now provide that assurance around any new Section 106 agreements that we enter into, because that was, again, a lesson that we've learned from a particular review of one particular agreement. So that's something that we've now picked up to improve that assurance going forward. Yeah.
Other third-party providers, as I say, whether it's care providers, certainly larger care providers or contractors of any sort.
So I don't know if Michael would want to. So obviously I'm not familiar with the care providers, not within the directorate, but major contracts that we would enter into from the directorate point of view, when we do the procurement first, we want to check that those who we're going to contract with have got the financial standing and the security to be able to provide the service that they're committing to. I don't believe we actually go into any further security over and above that, but I'd like to see if Michael's got anything you want to add on that.
The same thing, of course.
Just through you, Chair, and following that up, we do have a policy that requires some form of security, including parent company guarantees and the like. Where that's not enacted, it has to come through me for approval as to the reasons why. And there are sometimes exceptional cases in relation to that. That also covers the assessment of the bond and the quality of that, including not allowing any outside of UK bond support as well. So we do actually have a policy and an enactment of that.
Okay, thank you. Mohammed, you had your hand up and then it's gone down.
It was related to the performance scorecard. I just had a couple of points on that. The first one was that on internal health, the first thing we're tracking is the percentage of audit recommendations that have had an update each month, and which is tracking green. No issues with tracking that, but I wonder if a more useful metric would be in terms of how many are overdue at any point in time and how we're performing on that, as opposed to kind of comments on revised dates, if that makes sense. And the second point was it's quite a lot of contextual measures, just a general challenge if some of these could be RAG rated. Because if you strip out the contextual measures, you almost have as much red as green, and it's the question of kind of what kind of position does that show?
Frank.
So the first point around the audit measure, that's the similar measure that we've got at a council-wide level. So that's, again, the disaggregation at directorate level. But notwithstanding that being in the scorecard, we do monitor all the audit actions, particularly those that are overdue. So that's part of the assurance framework. And in particular, if you look in the assurance framework, I've given myself the target. I'll set the target for the directorate. So all existing overdue ones need to be resolved in the first quarter of next year, 25-26, and we're going to be actively monitoring. So by actively monitoring all the recommendations, I really want to get to a direction where we don't have any overdue audit actions, because we get the audit recommendations in draft form as a directorate when they're being presented. So we've got an opportunity to review both the actions and the timeframes. And at that point, we should be then agreeing the actual measures that need to be put in place to close the action down. So really, there shouldn't be any reason that we have overdue actions. That's my particular view as an exec director. So that's the regime we're wanting to make sure that we enter into for 25-26 onwards. So if I had the same opportunity to provide the report next year, I'm hoping I'll be able to say we don't have overdue actions as in relation to previous audit reports. So the other point around contextual, sometimes we're gathering the data at this point just to see, well, what's the actual performance level like? And then once we've done that, once we've got some trend analysis, then we might start to set targets and RAG ratings. So given that we've just constructed this, that's the first thing, are we getting the right measures? And then, as you've just outlined, once we get more information, we can then start to set the target and the RAG rating is based on that. Sometimes we say it's contextual because it's something that we're measuring, which is more the strategic measures, which is more of an outcome measure, which might not be directly linked to what the directorate provides, but it's a measure that we should be monitoring as a director. So an example of that would be, say, for the carbon footprint of the county. That would be a contextual measure where we may have some influence, but we don't completely control everything that relates to that particular measure. So, and I think that all performance management regimes should be actively reviewed. So whilst we've set this, we'll review it as we review both the performance, but also have we got the right measures? Should be more measures introduced because the risk environment or some things happen that we need to be monitoring more closely. And we may be wanting to check whether the targets are appropriate. So it's an ongoing review process that we put in place around performance management.
Just while we're on the balanced scorecard, there were announcements from the government earlier this week saying that additional money would go to counties that were able to demonstrate through RAG rating that they were performing well. So will this provide that information, or will you need to provide more, or do you not know yet?
So this is a directorate scorecard, and then each of the divisions have now got more operational indicators as well. So they're following the same model, so that we'll have divisional scorecards. So we've looked at what was published only on Monday in terms of the requirements to publish that data. So two things I would say about that is that, first of all, we do collect that data currently, so we are able to produce that report. But given the very specific focus, we'll be reporting that to committee before we submit those returns. So there'll be the information provided to Housing and Transport Committee so they can see the level of performance. And given its importance now in terms of being able to secure funding, that's the type of thing we may want to consider as being included in the directorate scorecard to make sure that we have that focused view of that, because of its weighting now in terms of importance around securing external funding, but can give assurance that that data that's been asked for is all available, is all collected, and also will be in a form that we can publish very easily. So in addition to being in scorecards, we'll start to review how we can make that type of information more publicly available, so it's easy to find for members and residents.
Okay, thank you. And congratulations on becoming Deputy Chief Executive. I guess the simple question from us is, with all your other responsibilities, are you confident that you can manage to be Deputy Chief Executive and manage what is quite a big and high-profile directorate?
So because of this is actually part of the reason why I think that I can respond positively to this. So I think the structure, the people, the systems, the governance environment we've got around the directorate means that we are able to give assurance that around the key issues that directorate needs to manage, that they are being well managed, well led, and we've got a good awareness of those issues that need to be improved. So I think that gives the capacity for me to provide the additional responsibilities as Deputy Chief Executive.
Thank you. That's what I was expecting you to say. I was assuming you were going to say. Chris.
Thank you. On a different matter, and it is covered in the outstanding matters in, I think it's Appendix D. I was interested in the move towards improved capital project management. Now, in a very good news, bad news conversation that we had in a council meeting, committee meeting fairly recently, we had reported to us a very significant overspend on capital being projected for 24-25. And on further investigation, it turns out that it wasn't that we were going around spending lots more money on things that we'd agreed budgets for, but that the budget slippage, the project slippage allowance hadn't been achieved, if that's the right word to use, or rather we'd managed to do more than we thought we would do. I think we'd actually assumed that there was a 30% slippage on the budget for the year, and we'd come in significantly below that. Now, that's both good news and bad news. It's bad news from a budgetary control point of view, of course, in that it looks as though a lot more money has been spent than we'd allowed for in our capital budget for the year. It's good news that we get the jobs done within a relevant period. So what interests me in the capital project management items which are here, where we're talking about revised target dates in summer of 25 to try and bring these in, are we going to have a better idea in the future about the likely outturn slippage earlier in the year, so that it's going to be possible for that to be fed through into accounts, and we won't be surprised a month before the end of the financial year suddenly to discover that either there's a lot more slippage than had been budgeted for, or that there's a lot less.
So again, I'll speak from a direct perspective. So before 24-25, the historic performance on capital programme delivery had been very poor in terms of what was delivered against the budget. So I think typically, 70% of delivery in terms of spend against budget, which is because of that historic pattern, which is why corporately it was outlined whatever had been programmed, that had been effectively covered by a capital variation budget, because obviously there's another risk if you over provide the finance for something you don't deliver, then it's putting additional cost on the revenue budget of the council. This year, that has somewhat changed, because what we have done is, first of all, we've reviewed every project to make sure we understand the risk profile against each project, any optimism bias. We understand what the optimism bias for each of those projects, and when will it start, and what are the key deliverables. And so far this year, what we've been able to demonstrate is that we've significantly improved the performance in 24-25. So moving into 25-26, already the capital variation budget for next year is set at a lower level. So that's the first thing. But what we will do is, as we did last year, we'll review at Q1 all the schemes in the programme within the Place and Sustainability Directorate, what's assumed behind the profile, do an assessment of that profile, assess that it's still deliverable, and then we'd be able to review whether the capital variation budget level needs to be adjusted further. So that's the approach that we're going through. But I think the headline around this is about having more confidence in the way that the capital programme's constructed, more confidence around what schemes are actually included in the capital programme, the delivery timeframes. That enables Michael and colleagues to have more confidence around the level of capital variation budget that's set. Michael, did you want to add? Yeah.
Chair, if you'll forgive me, just an observation. I think we're straying into territory that is actually more for Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee. Obviously, as members, you're wanting to audit the assurance statement from the Executive Director. So I would just encourage us to remain in that space for future financial policy decisions. Members who are also members of SRP committee will undoubtedly be able to discuss those in that environment. So that was just an encouragement that we focus on the task in hand, Chair, if we may. Thank you.
I accept that entirely, Stephen, but the trouble is SRP don't always do the job that we would like them to do, or we think they should be doing, and or we tend to step into their shoes, but I accept it entirely. Right. Well, that has put us in our place. Are there any other thoughts that you've got? Timesheets is a bone of contention, Stephen, and is that something which you think should be referred to SRP, or is something which we should legitimately consider? Mairead made a very sensible comment about when they did an audit of local transport capital block funding and the grant, and also you are Frank instigating time recording for all capital work. But should we not be doing time recording for revenue work as well? And do you have views about that? And do the committee have views about that? And is that something which is in the remit of this committee to consider?
It's an interesting question, Chair. I think that given it would be a policy decision, it's a matter for another committee first. In terms of my personal view on timesheet and timesheet recording as a premise, the bureaucracy, the burden, and quite frankly, the lack of trust in your workforce that tends to demonstrate is something I'm wholly opposed to. In fact, I removed the time recording system in my previous authority because maintaining the IT and managing the system in itself was becoming an unnecessary burden. So whilst I recognise that in some cases time recording can be helpful, having seen this applied in the police service, in the NHS, and in local government, it just becomes an industry in itself and actually is wasteful in my experience. So whilst I can understand for some discrete projects recording a time may be necessary because we are buying time from other organisations, I certainly wouldn't be an advocate for it in terms of overall council operations. I think it's a false economy and, dare I say, somewhat Victorian in terms of approach to management of staff. Thank you.
Interesting viewpoint. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I'm jumping in very, very, very quickly. As an FD of a professional organisation that filled in timesheets, I came to the conclusion that Disraeli got it wrong. There's lies, damn lies, and timesheets.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst the accountant within me may agree with your comment, Chair, I have to say that I do agree with the Chief Executive that there is a danger which is often not avoided in local government, that we end up doing so much analysis that it actually ties us up and takes resources away from the work that we're meant to do. The balance there is an extremely difficult one to get right. The danger is always that we go for more analysis, we ask for more information, and we never get rid of old information, so we end up just clogging ourselves up with massive reports which really don't achieve as much as they should do. So whilst from a technical point of view, I fully understand why you make the comment that you do make, Chair, I have to say that I think the Chief Executive is right, and maybe we ought to look more fundamentally at quite a lot of what we do to see if a lot of the reporting which happens, and especially the reporting which happens which never gets to members, is it really, does it have value? Is it adding value, or is it merely adding cost?
Chair, I can't remember if I said it at this committee or strategy, resources and performance. So Councillor Bowden and yourself, Chair, may have to forgive me for doubling up, which may in itself be inefficient. I think I made the observation to members at committee recently that when I worked in a national body in government, I was meant, or my part of the organisation was meant to submit monthly reports to the Cabinet Office on staffing levels across the totality of the NHS. And I decided to see if there was actually any basis for that evidence being required and stopped sending the reports for a period of 6 months. And it took 6 months for the Cabinet Office to ask me for the report. And at that point, I said to them, but you've done without it for 6 months. What exactly do you need it for? And the answer was, just in case we get asked the question, at which point I said, in that case, if you get asked the question, feel free to pass it on to me when it's raised. Otherwise, I think we'll stop doing the report. So using that as an example, Chair, I entirely agree with Councillor Bowden. I am sure there are bits of reporting within this organisation, as there would be in almost any other organisation, that we could do without. I think partly one of the things we're trying to do by embedding directorate scorecards is start focusing on the things we should be measuring and monitoring, and probably trying to remove some of those things that creep into organisations over time for a whole range of reasons. One of the pieces of work, entirely separate to Frank's assurance statement, that we do have underway at present is what I would call a governance mapping exercise. So that's not a member level governance review. It's map all the existing officer groups that exist across the council and then actually work out, is there any decision making being made there? Is there any requirement for that meeting? Or is this just a means for officers to meet to discuss issues? And probably, I would imagine from experience elsewhere, probably 2/3 of the groups that we catch on the map will be able to be dispensed with. Thank you.
May I just ask the Chief Executive, have you set up a new group in order to look at this?
At some stage, you might like to do the same with committees, because that's certainly the way some of us work as individuals. We do stray into things which interest us or we think are relevant to us, but are not directly related. Right. Any final questions of Frank? I think we've lost Mohammed. No. Okay. Thank you. This is now I think the second report from a director. So I just wanted to confirm, are we getting the things that, first of all, meet our terms of reference, and secondly, are useful to us and to you, Frank? Does it provide the level of scrutiny that you don't get in highways and transport that is helpful, that your time coming here is beneficial?
I think preparing the report is not just helpful to myself, it's helpful for the arrangements I want to enforce and implement across the directorate. So it is a useful mechanism from my perspective. And anything that provides assurance and transparency around these arrangements can only be seen as a strength, I think. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So go on, Chris.
It's not our job, of course, to replicate the work of service committees. However, it is our job to ensure that control systems are in place, which should be in place in all of the service areas which exist. And that's why I think this process, which is a new process, is really valuable because it allows us to ask new questions. And as long as we don't stray into those service areas and we do look at the controls which are in place, I think it continues to be a valuable process. It will last for a certain period of time, and then it will become stale, and then we'll need to look at something else to do. But I think we've got a series of these to go through now, which all of which I think will be useful in allowing us to ask some new questions that we haven't thought of before.
Okay, thank you very much, Frank. So just for the purposes of the record, we'll move to the report recommendations. The committee is being asked to consider the assurance provided over the adequacy of the council's control environment and compliance with corporate governance controls, which we have done, and no vote is required. So thank you very much, Frank. Stephen.
Chair, just mindful of one of the questions on the report you've received. I asked the question and now have an answer. So helpful to just clarify for members that during the last 12-month period, 14 RIDDOR incidents were reported for council employees, 25 RIDDOR incidents were reported in schools in Cambridgeshire, and only 106 near misses were reported, which speaks very much to my point about a very low level of near miss reporting. Thank you.
And do you happen to know, as Frank is here, what the numbers were for the directorate?
Chair, sorry, no, I've only got the global position right now. Thank you.
Welcome back, Mohammed. I think we lost you for a moment, but
Yeah.
and unless you've got any last minute questions, because Frank is just packing up, we've finished with Frank Jordan's art piece.
No, I think I'm good. Thank you.
No. Okay, thank you very much, Frank. So we now move on to item 6, which is the regular internal audit progress report, which will be introduced by Mairead Claydon, the head of internal audit and risk management. Mairead, do you want to just highlight any particular issues?
Thank you, Chair. So this is the progress report to the 28th of February. As usual, Section 3 shows the reports which have been issued as final since our last report, as well as reports currently in draft. And Section 4 provides a summary on 2 reports which have been issued with a limited opinion. At Section 6, you will find some updates on the current 2024 to 25 year audit plan. And we do have a separate report about the draft audit plan for the next financial year, which is the next item on the agenda. Section 7 provides an overview of the implementation of audit agreed actions. We have seen a reduction in outstanding actions, currently at 69, which is down from 81 at our last report. Most of that reduction has come in actions overdue for between 3 and 12 months. So that is positive in terms of seeing a reduction in actions that have been outstanding for a slightly longer period of time. We also note at section 7.2.4, there are a couple of recommendations from the interims and agency staff audit report, which the service have requested to close as unimplemented. These were both medium risk actions. So while they are recommended to manage risk in a service area, the decision not to implement does not create a significant risk for the council as a whole. And then Section 9 includes updates on fraud, corruption and whistleblowing, and that shows 35 whistleblowing cases that have been reported this year to the end of February, as well as summaries of the cases that have closed. So very happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any comments, questions? Chris.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, it's a very crude way of measuring improvement to look at the number of outstanding items, but nevertheless, it's going in the right direction. And compared with where we were just 12 months ago, and the nature of some of the things which are outstanding, and the period for which they were outstanding 12 months ago, this is a significant improvement. So even though it's a very crude measure, I welcome it. The one which is highlighted is the DSG safety valve review and work associated with that. And I don't want to get into operational matters here. I just want to look at overall controls. But my question is, if this is known by internal audit, is the weekly data task and finish group still monitoring the progress of clearing data quality issues? Is that still going on, or has that now been completed?
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. I would need to get a specific update from the service on the detail of exactly how they're managing that. Oh, maybe Michael can pick up.
Chair, through you, the position related to the impending system change means that there is data quality work that's continuing to ongo through that project. So the nature of the work continues. It's got a slightly different format, of which it now sits in something called the EYES project, the Education and Early Years system, and so that is carrying out data quality. There is the data transfer for the test system carried out this week. And then there will be a review in terms of the next steps, in terms of the further data quality and data cleansing that is needed after this week.
All right, thank you. Mairead, a couple of questions from me about the schools audit. It's clearly you've now done a few of the audits, 10 in the sample, and you've said a report on the thematic findings or the generic findings can be shared more widely. Is that going to be shared more widely, and if so, with whom, and how can we encourage you to do that?
Thank you. I think that's just a slightly strange bit of phrasing from us, so I apologise. So that that report is in draft and has been shared more widely, would be a more appropriate way of putting it. So the nature of the report cuts across responsibilities within the Education Directorate and within the school's finance team. So we share that across both teams and then work with both sides to kind of agree the final version of that report. One of the key outputs of that report when we do these financial governance reviews is a letter from the Director of Education out to schools, highlighting both some of the common themes around weaker areas of practice and reminding schools of particular areas that they need to make sure they're getting right every time, but also sharing some of the good practice that we see at schools as well. If we see a school that's taken a particularly innovative approach to solving a problem, we try to share that across the board as well through that letter. So that should be coming out soon when the report is agreed and finalised.
Excellent. Jeff.
Thank you, Chair. And just a general question, really, and I'm expecting a general answer. I don't expect a specific one. On the highways contract, which was deferred from last year into this year, can you tell us broadly what the terms of reference are? Not specifically, we were talking a little bit before the meeting about controls and procurement processes and so forth, but I mean, the highway contract has been going for a long time and will continue to go for a couple of years, I think. So what is it we're looking at? How effectively performance, whether it's got the sort of KPI measures that we can actually hold the contractors to account, etc. I mean, what is it, the specific focus?
Thank you. So, there is currently some work going on between internal audit and the highways team, looking at reconciliation processes within the highways contract, which I think is discussed briefly in this report. The intention is that by doing a full review of the highways contract, Traditionally, when we look at a contract, we would go through a series of stages. So the initial stage is reading the contract, understanding the contract. What are the key drivers? What drives payment? How is performance measured? Can performance influence payment? And understanding essentially those key controls and key mechanisms within the contract that the effective contract management needs to ensure are operating in the right way. That for the highways contract has been undertaken sort of a number of years ago during a previous audit, and the actual terms of the contract have not changed significantly. So we would essentially be relying mostly on the work that's already been undertaken on that highways contract and moving into what we would normally see as the second phase of a contracts review, focusing in on the contract management. So for those key provisions within the contract which drive value and which ensure that we're paying the right amount for the right service and we're getting the performance at the correct quality, how effectively is the service ensuring that its contract management arrangements drive that performance from the contract. So for the highways review, we'd be very much focusing in on that part of contract management, looking at the processes and procedures in place to drive that from the contract. And I'd be happy to share a terms of reference with you when it goes out if you're interested.
Okay. And you're confirming that there is no change to the contract. There's been no major amendments. It isn't exactly the same form as it
Yes,
was
so we would
originally.
look for any deeds of variation or similar that have gone
Again,
through.
I don't want to go into what the Highways Committee and their management of the process, but I understand that they have been looking at value for money and indeed making, well, I mean, you're auditing, they're doing the management, but there have been a number of investigations that they've looked at performance, and changes have been made, certainly in practice. So, but that's not the objective, it's just the general processes. Thank you.
Sorry, Mohammed, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a question on the rental income audit. So it sounds like it was a limited assurance report in 2019 and again in 2024, this time by a co-source provider. And some of the actions coming out of that are around sort of just checking that the income you expect to see is in line with what's actually coming through in terms of invoices or cash, and having some controls around being able to check the service charge essentially. They sound like fairly routine controls you might expect in a rental income area. So my question is, what's the kind of root cause for one, having those actions 5 years ago and hopefully addressing them, to then 5 years later not having those kind of basic controls essentially in places? What's kind of driving that?
Thank you. So I think one thing that's worth noting for this committee is that the previous report was issued in 2019. And as a result of COVID, there was a decision taken by the previous Audit and Accounts Committee to not follow up on the implementation of all audit actions. So there was a step away from following up, particularly on anything that wasn't at that very high level of risk. And so what we don't have is records within audit, as we normally would have in this case, to say, we know that as of such and such a date, this system was brought in, which was supposed to address the issues identified by that audit. So I suspect that what has happened is that the follow-up has not taken place. The actions haven't been implemented. The service has implemented a new system to manage property, which is a really positive step forward for the service in terms of managing all kinds of risk within the council's properties. But what hasn't happened yet is the link between that system and the kind of financial management of the rental income. So what we really need to drive through the actions agreed as a part of this audit is that link between making sure that the property system is actually being used and is able to be used to reconcile our income.
Great, thank you. And just, I guess, kind of pushing back on that, is there any other areas like that where we may not have had done follow up during that kind of period where we may have concerns or want to audit again in the near future, just to make sure we cover the risk?
I think, and I would have to double check my records, but I think this is the last one where we had issued a double limited opinion and have not followed up since. So hopefully this is the last of the COVID affected audits.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Earlier, we talked about trainees and the good recruitment of staff. The question that Chris put when we were having our private session with internal auditors was about sharing expertise and putting people out into other company county councils, or in this instance where you've got a trainee, will the trainee be rotating around different departments to get different experience within the county council?
Thank you. Yes. So we have a very successful, I think, trainee scheme, which is joint with colleagues in finance. The report touches on the recent recruitment exercise, and I have to thank colleagues in finance who do a considerable amount of the administration around that. So every year we recruit usually 2 to 3 trainees. Typically, one belongs to audit and 2 belong to finance, but they rotate through placements in different teams within finance and within the internal audit team. Typically, the audit trainees do 2 years in audit and 1 in finance, and for finance trainees, it's 2 years in finance and 1 in audit. And what we find is that creates a really great pool of prospective accountants and auditors, and we have seen, in the past few months, some movement of auditors to finance and accountants to audit, which is really positive, and it just helps to build up a good level of skills in both teams, I would say.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments, questions for Mairead? No. So we'll move to the report recommendations. The committee is asked to consider and comment on the content of the report, which we have done, and no vote is required. So we move on to item 7, which is the draft internal audit plan for 2025-26. Mairead's going to introduce this report. I would just say that with the local elections coming, we need to be very flexible about whatever it is that we might agree, because the new council may have completely different priorities and might have different risks assessment and all the rest of it. But bearing that in mind, Mairead, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our draft internal audit plan for the 2025 to 26 financial year. This has come to you via CLT, and it is based on a risk assessment which is completed by the internal audit team, and it also brings together the views of other key officers, including members of CLT, other key colleagues, people like the head of procurement, for example, feed in their views on where we need to focus each year. For this committee, I would particularly draw your attention to table 1 in the report, and that sort of visually illustrates how the audit plan covers the different strategic risk areas facing the council. And then further down in the report, table 2 will also show you how the balance of risk coverage compares across those different risk areas to the past couple of years of audit plans that have been completed. So at Cambridgeshire, the way we set out our audit plan is we have that core audit plan, which typically doesn't change significantly from year to year. That incorporates things that we do every year, such as the key financial systems. It has our allowance of time for grants and whistleblowing. And then we have a flexible audit plan, and that's all those reviews which are heavily based on the current risk assessment and thus are likely to continue to be updated and changed throughout the year as the council's risks change and its priorities change. In terms of how these look different to previous years, for the core audit plan, in particular, I would highlight we've set aside more time for whistleblowing and counter fraud, and that's because we're seeing a higher time requirement there. So to the end of February this year, we had spent about 176 days on whistleblowing and counter fraud against our original full year budget, which was 140 days. Conversely, we're expecting to be required to complete fewer grant audits. That could decrease further as we're still awaiting final news on audit requirements regarding the new Children and Families grant. Equally, we have had one surprise grant pop up since having written this report, so it's always possible that it can go in the other direction. And then in terms of the flexible audit plan, One of the key things to note really is that this year we've set aside a small contingency budget, which isn't something we've done previously. The aim of that is just to give us a bit more flexibility with regards to adding in additional reviews or increasing time on existing reviews if needed, particularly if we're making complex findings, without having to immediately take another audit out of the plan in order to find capacity for that. So very happy to take feedback, thoughts, questions on the plan.
I haven't really got a comment on the plan. It seems very sensible indeed, but to get the sort of level of accuracy on the days that you're spending on all these jobs or sub projects or internal, suggests you're filling out timesheets.
That is correct. We do
You do.
track our time in order.
We've had the discussion about timesheets. Let's move on. Any other comments? Thanks, Alan. Emma, does this look about right from an external auditor's point of view? I don't know whether you've had a chance to review what Mairead is proposing to do, whether that fits with your understanding.
I don't think there's anything that jumps out as being inappropriate. I think it's right that you've got that cycle and you're following up on those ones previously. But no, otherwise looks reasonable.
Chris.
Thank you. I'm interested in the extent to which the core internal audit work is subject to risk assessment. And a fair amount of information is given in paragraph 6.1 about what is being done and what isn't being done. Some things are done every 2 years, and a specific mention is made about a new confirmation of payee software system, which will be looked at. So I have often looked at internal audit functions in organizations and been surprised by the amount of work which is done, which is an absolute repetition of what was done the year before, and which there's no reason to believe that there's going to be anything different from what there was the last year or the year before or the year before. And worse, the system which is being tested is tested in exactly the same way as it was the year before and the year before and the year before. So my question is, I do see that there is some element of looking at changes which are taking place and regarding those as being areas of risk. But how do you avoid the staleness of doing exactly the same tests year after year after year in order to try and get assurance on things?
It's a great question, and some of the elements of this plan either don't change year on year or we simply have to do them. So that would be things like this includes the allowance of time for the time that my team spend on risk management. It includes allowance of time for my reporting to this committee, for the support that we provide to the annual governance framework, things like that. It also includes the amount of time that we spend on grants, which require my sign off as head of internal audit. And so for those elements, we don't typically see a lot of change and we don't see that risk assessment. But within some of the other elements, we class them as part of the core audit plan, I suppose, because they are themes that won't change in terms of the risk. So the key financial systems, we do see change year on year in terms of which systems we're looking at. So this year or this year upcoming, we're proposing to look at bank reconciliation and general ledger. Neither of those have been covered in the past 1 or 2 years for each, but I couldn't tell you which way around it is. So those are coming back in just on the basis that they've not been looked at recently. The confirmation of payee software is a particular new review that we haven't done previously, and that's based on our risk assessment and the fact that we know that confirmation of payee software actually hopefully will provide benefits across all the different key financial systems. So we want to get assurance that that's working in the way that we hope it is. Things like procurement, typically within our core procurement and commissioning audit work, we would have a procurement governance review and a procurement compliance review. So the headlines there don't necessarily change, but the detail of what you might do under that does change. And actually this year we've got some more significant changes in there because of bringing in the Procurement Act and the need really for some of that to have a chance to bed in before we start trying to audit compliance with very new requirements. We've said that this year we're going to focus on looking at procurement breaches, which we haven't looked at previously, and also do a review looking at contract overspends to try and understand if the council is spending more on contracts than it expects to. Are we compliant with our contract procedure rules, and are we compliant with legislation in that respect? So hopefully the headings within the core plan don't change and they stay the same, and often the allowance of overall kind of time for that risk area won't necessarily change. But within that, we do risk assess and we do try to make sure that that is focused on whatever the most relevant risk is. Schools is another good example. We have a block of time in there for schools audits, but every year we discuss via the Schools Causing Concern Forum and with colleagues in education and schools finance, what is the focus of that work going to be, and how can that best provide value and provide assurance to the authority?
Thank you. That's very reassuring to hear all of that, and a lot of it is in the report, and I'm very grateful for that. I was thinking more in terms of the financial systems and what appears in some areas, and I've no idea if this is the case in county, but what I have seen in some places, what I've experienced in some places, is that exactly the same tests are performed on the same systems. You'd get 25 transactions, which will be followed through all the way from beginning to end. You'd have 40 items taken off a ledger and tested, and it becomes so similar year on year that anyone on the inside would actually, they know what to expect when the internal auditors come around, because it's the same as they were asked the year before and the year before that. And it's that's what I meant by staleness. How can you manage to keep the necessary level of assurance without just repeating exactly what was done the year before on things such as financial systems, where those financial systems haven't changed?
I think part of the key question there is always, have the financial systems changed? Because actually there often is more change in a system than you might think year on year, and sometimes you can repeat a test that you did last year and find a different result. So it is always worth being mindful that the systems can change. For the key financial systems which are shared with the lead authorities, we also have been rotating the I don't know what to call it, the lead on each of the individual systems between the different authorities. So you will get the benefit of a different set of auditors per system who may have different views about what they need to do, how to approach that. And I would say also that some of those decisions come down to what was the assurance opinion the year before. If I have a system that has a double limited opinion, I will probably go in and do the exact same testing again, because what I want to see is that now the testing is giving me a good opinion, and therefore I can see that there has been a strengthening of that system. However, if I've had a system that's had a good opinion for 3 years in a row, then potentially it's not an effective use of audit time, and it's not a risk-focused use of audit time to be doing that testing in exactly the same way again. So if that's the case, we may look at reducing the testing, looking at different areas, or moving to say, actually, this is a system that we will only look at once every 2 years or once every 3 years based on what we think the risk profile is, and based on our knowledge of any upcoming system changes as well.
And thank you, Chair. Just one final question. To what extent do you evaluate the statistical validity of the tests and the samples that you do? If you have a system, a financial system, which has 100,000 transactions going through in a year, testing 25 of them probably is unlikely to achieve the statistical validity to give you a degree of assurance. So to what extent do you do a calculation based on the statistical validity of the sample sizes?
So currently, we do not do significant work on statistical validity of sample sizes, and that is based on our practical ability to deliver more than a certain amount of sample testing on some of these systems. The sample sizing, we do have some guidelines within the service for the kinds of sample sizes that we would look at based on number of transactions and the kind of frequency of transactions as well. But we are not a team that does extensive statistical modelling for our sample sizes on key financial systems.
I won't push the issue now because now is not the time, but I would ask that some thought be given as to having the statistical significance of the sampling which is done in order to achieve the assurance that we get. I think it's a relevant challenge to make. I'm not asking for an answer now, but as in the months ahead, I wonder if that some thought could be given to that, please.
I think that's very appropriate. Go on,
Yeah,
quick one.
well, yeah, very, very quickly. I mean, we have discussed this before, haven't we? And the use of AI, which must be coming into the auditing processes, both internal and external. So I'm assuming that we will hear more about it as those systems become more common.
As a word against that, I recall, I'm sorry to say, more than 40 years ago, being quite excited by hearing about what were called CATs, computer assisted auditing techniques. And I thought, oh, this is great. The computers do all the work for you in terms of doing an audit. And of course, it doesn't work out like that at all. And we've got to be very careful not to think AI just provides us an answer to every single question that we've got. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as that.
It should be able to pick out the extraordinary items or the vulnerable items, and then somebody has to make a judgment about the transaction. It should be able to.
In time, I think probably Councillor Seif's correct on that. And in time, auditing may end up being an automated system rather than being a human system. But that's not for now.
Okay. One of the things which is for now, potentially, is sharing some of the work with our partners where we've got common systems. And one of the difficulties we've had is the delivery of stuff from West Northants in the past. Are we sure that based on your plan, you're going to be able to deliver, get everything delivered, not you deliver, but get everything delivered in a timely fashion, so that we're not going to have to qualify your audit opinion because stuff is late or has not turned up?
Thank you, Chair. I would be reasonably optimistic about that as I can be. I think one of the systems that created a lot of difficulty in getting a final report previously was payroll, which is now with my team and within my gift to attempt to address that. So.
Well, thank you. And the Chief Executive is here, so he is listening avidly when I say some of our partners have not delivered as quickly as we might have hoped in the past.
Chair, as I think this committee has heard me say before, I share those views and have some concerns as well, which is why I'm grateful it's our audit team that are looking at these areas particularly. Without wanting to take us backwards to go forwards, I will just say that obviously all of these shared arrangements will need to be revisited as part of our ongoing work in respect of local government reorganisation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think, Mairead, well, I think that we've given your internal audit plan a good airing. We'll move to the report recommendation. The committee is being asked to review and comment on the proposed draft internal audit plan for 2025-2026, which we've done, and no vote is required. Item 8 is the corporate risk register, which will be introduced by Mairead. Now, folks, if you have any questions on the public report and appendices, we can discuss those. But if anyone has any questions about the confidential appendix, please let me know quickly so that we can move into confidential session at the end of the meeting. But I'm assuming that we won't need to discuss that particular appendix. So Mairead, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the regular update report on the corporate risk register, following on from our previous report in October. And this is the same report that has been discussed at Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee earlier in the month. So you will find the full corporate risk register as Appendix 1, and Table 1 provides an overview of the full register. Particular changes to highlight are that risk 6, which is the risk that the council's workforce is not able to meet business need, has reduced in score. That's moved from a 15 to a 10 following an overall improvement in recruitment outcomes across the council. And then there is also a new risk, risk 13, that has been escalated to the corporate risk register. This is the risk that arrangements to support people with learning disabilities result in poor outcomes due to uncertainty of decoupling of funding arrangements via the Section 75 agreement. This risk was escalated from the Adults Health and Commissioning Directorate's risk register in early January and is currently scored at 16, which is in excess of the council's risk appetite. There is a summary of the background to that risk and the current arrangements to manage the risk at section 3.4 of the report. Other key elements include a brief update on risk management approach to local government reorganisation at section 4.2, a risk management action from the external audit value for money opinion at section 4.3, and an update on the implementation of the corporate risk strategy at section 4.4, particularly including the news that our new corporate risk manager has started in post and is conducting a review of risk management arrangements to inform a refresh of the strategy, which will be with this committee, I think, in June. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. My only thought was, I think it's on table 1 where you're showing the changes in scores for the residual risk score. It would be helpful to include a column which showed the risk appetite or the target, so that we knew not only the direction of travel as to whether or not things were improving or not, but also what we were aiming for. That because that generally doesn't change, it's just the activities that will change. So any other comments from folk? Chris?
Without attempting to rehash what's already been said at strategy, resources and performance, but it is relevant for audit and accounts. We are going to see some significant changes taking place in the very near future. I believe this summer we're going to have changes for the benefit of this committee. To what extent will there be changes in this, particularly when it comes to risk appetite and the way in which that will be calculated and shown to us, and what part members are meant to play? And I don't mean members of this committee, I mean service committee members are meant to play in the determination of risk appetite.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. So we will be bringing our annual risk report both to SRPC and to this committee in June, or possibly July, but I'm pretty sure it's June. That will include the proposed updates to the council's risk management policy. It will also include the updated risk strategy and any outcomes from the risk review that's being carried out by our new corporate risk manager. So there are a range of changes that this committee may see coming from that. One of the key areas will be around looking at risk appetite and around how we set risk appetite in terms of having an understanding of our tolerances around risk, as well as our optimum risk position for different aspects of risk within the authority. So that will be captured within the policy. And then additionally, we will look to include a bit more detail as well, I think, about the respective roles of SRPC and Audit Committee in risk management, and the policy and service committees as well. I know that the Chief Executive kindly circulated a note on that earlier this year to the committees, and we will try to include a bit more detail on that within the policy as well. So looking forward to bringing you some updated documents around risk management.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? No? Okay, go on, Jeff.
Well, I'm just on risk of major incident following on from Heathrow. I know that this covers utilities. That's risk 4. So if utilities go down, but I just wonder, do we have adequate backups for all the various utilities that serve us?
Through Chair, we carry out dart testing. We last carried out an exercise 6 months ago, and we'll continue to do that. So that looks at the power outage across a range of facilities, not just buildings. So yes, we've continually test that, including this building, and also look at that from a wider emergency planning point of view with our partners as well.
Generators, secondary generators, or there's other systems we can plug into. I suppose you can plug into the grid if the substations go down, but.
We have a number of backup buildings that have, or a number of buildings that have backup facilities. Not every building has backup facilities.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? So, Stephen.
Chair, probably just to follow up on Michael's point and to expand slightly to reassure members. The council has a tried and tested suite of business continuity plans. Not all of our buildings are required to have backup generators because not all of our buildings would need to be functional in the event of a disaster recovery incident. We are very clear about which buildings do need backup capacity, which buildings would need to be required, and that's all built within our emergency planning team. I have to say we also have, as I'm sure members will appreciate, quite extensive experience following the pandemic of moving to an entirely remote setup of working. So I'm very confident that compared to disaster recovery and business continuity arrangements I recall from 10, 15 years ago, we are in a very different place now because of the technology we're able to use. Thank you.
Okay. Now, and that's an example of an issue which SRMP should be addressing, isn't it? We should be checking whether or not there is a risk register which includes the points about a serious incident occurs, but not diving into the detail of what you're going to do about it. Is that correct? I think that's where Mairead's idiot's guide as to what SRMP and audit and account should be doing would be helpful.
Chair, agree with that. I mean, I just would like to make the point again that the corporate risk register does actually cater for that, as you can see from the report that's presented today. So disaster recovery, business continuity is inbuilt in the corporate risk register already. Certainly within the strategy and partnerships directorate, where our emergency planning team sits, we can go right the way down into individual lines and detailed plans for both emergency and business continuity requirements, much of which have actually been updated over the period of the last 12 months. And in terms of improving our controls over that environment, just to hasten to add that in 4 days' time, our emergency planning team separates fully from Peterborough City Council because that was previously a shared team. As part of the uncoupling from Peterborough and ensuring we have adequate capacity to deal with these issues, our emergency planning team becomes Cambridgeshire County Council only from the 1st of April again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move to the report recommendations. The committee is recommended to note the corporate risk register and no vote is required. Item 9 is the committee agenda plan. Would the Democratic Services Officer advise us of any updates to the published report?
No changes, Chair.
Members, do you have any questions or comments? Obviously, this will be a bit dependent on who is on the committee next time, but Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that it's really difficult when you have a whole set of elections and various of us may not be returning, or various of us, even if we do return, may not be allocated to this committee. So new members who may be totally new to the council, may be totally new to local government, or at least maybe new to this committee, will find themselves sitting around this table on the 4th of June. I know that training will be provided, but training, you can't really be trained for this committee in a 2-hour, 3-hour session. It takes a lot more than that. And that's one of the reasons why it's quite important that we do have members of this committee who have some degree of experience of the council as a whole, or of councils as a whole, because they can all bring their actual experience of the way in which things work outside the audit and accounts function into this committee. I just wonder whether on the 4th of June it may be helpful to have something which is, if not training, then something which actually will assist in bringing people together. My fear is that you have individuals coming along to these meetings, and if they're faced with a normal agenda, as we've just had now, they may actually feel lost, and they may feel they can't participate. They certainly, in my experience from the past of many people, they certainly will be afraid to ask questions for fear of looking stupid. And it's been my experience that if you do ask a stupid question, you find other people who might have been around for a lot longer than you have didn't know the answer either, but they didn't want to ask the question either. So I just wonder if at our committee meeting itself, if there's something which can be done to assist in the induction process for the new members.
Rishinda.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Just to assure the committee that as part of the member induction programme, which Councillor Bowden mentioned, it is planned to have an Audit and Accounts Committee training session on the 22nd of May, so that's in good time before the first meeting.
Okay, that's very helpful. And Mohammed will be a continuation. and if some of us are re-elected, we can put in the comment that it would be sensible to have a bit of continuity of experienced members and mix with new people who ask difficult questions, challenging questions. Okay, thank you very much. I think, therefore, we have noted the agenda plan. That concludes today's business and the work of this committee for the current administration.
Perhaps,
It will meet next.
Perhaps, Chair, we could wish Mohammed a very happy Eid festival, which I believe is coming.
Thank you very much.
Indeed. Yes, happy Easter. So thank you, everybody, for all your contributions over the many years that we've been involved in this committee, particularly to the officers and to Emma and Sarah from KPMG who've come on board. And thank you, members, for all your contributions as well. It's been good fun. Chris, you want the last word.
May I thank you, Chair and the Vice Chair, but may I thank you as well as all the officers for the work you've done over the last 4 years. It's been very much appreciated the way in which this committee has been handled. You haven't been afraid for people to ask stupid questions, and I know I must have asked quite a few in the last 4 years. It really is helpful that the challenges that we feel need to be made are able to be articulated, even if they're battered back to us and it's explained why we may be wrong. I think it's really important that there is that spirit of openness and willingness to accept challenges and questions. So I thank you for encouraging that over the last 4 years.
Thank you very much. Well, that's it, folks. Good luck in the elections, and see you all again, hopefully, in the near future.